Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our witnesses as well for being here today. While we are taking this time to review the climate challenges facing us, I think we should also take a look back at tax policies which the very users tell us have been successful. For example, after the end of this year, new wind power projects will not be eligible for the wind production tax credit. Why? Because the wind power industry came to us with data which showed they no longer needed the credit for their energy to be cost competitive with other sources of electricity and worked on a bipartisan path to winding down their credit. Similarly, solar supporters worked on a bipartisan basis to find a long-term solution which phases out the residential solar credit and reduces the commercial credit to 10% after 2023. Based on this work, the message of these industries during tax reform was simple. They had already been reformed and they wanted to leave that agreement in place, and we won't need to come back to extend or enhance these provisions in the future. I'm actually disappointed we haven't yet been able to enact similar legislation for the biodiesel tax credit, which stakeholders across the industry, from soybean growers and renderers to refiners to blenders and users, brought us to last year. With all three of these provisions, wind, solar, and biodiesel, the goal has been to make them more price competitive as opposed to making competing fuels more expensive. Mr. Powell, do you believe that the best strategy for cutting carbon emissions is to actually increase the cost of traditional carbon-emitting energy?
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I do not. The point here is to develop cheap, clean energy technologies that the developing world will adopt on their own and reduce global carbon emissions. The developing world is extremely unlikely to adopt policies that make their traditional energy more expensive. They need technology options that are cheaper than the alternatives. We've already made a huge amount of progress in bringing down the cost of wind and solar, as you describe. Now we need a much broader suite of very low-cost, high-performing clean energy technologies that the developing world will take up purely on their economic merits.
So affordability increases access.
Absolutely.
Certainly, that does make sense to me. But I do want to emphasize the fact that I appreciate various stakeholders in tax policy working together with us to bring about longer-term policy. Some phase downs because of a lack of necessity moving forward. And so I appreciate the work that has been done, and I think can point to some progress that we have made in terms of being good stewards of our environment. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.